for a third time in 40 and a fourth time in 44 for the presidency. Now, Germany surrenders on May the 7th. VE Day is May the 8th. In July of 1945 is the Potsdam Conference. Now, the Potsdam Conference was the big three. Again, now I should tell you this. There are three big three conferences. Tehran, which is in November of 43, and that's Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. And then Yalta, which is in February of 45, which is Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. And then Potsdam, which is in July of 45, which is Stalin, Truman, and Attlee. Remember, Churchill was elected out of office for his party loses power in 45, and he leaves the conference, and Attlee takes over. So there are three wartime conferences. Now, it would be good to know something about all three of them. At the Tehran conference, I think the big thing is the second front. Right? At Yalta, I mean, really, we talked about Yalta today, and we said, you know, at Yalta, I mean, Stalin promises the end of the war against Japan, but the real big issue at Yalta is Eastern Europe. And what's the Soviet Union going to do about free elections in Eastern Europe, possessions in China? At Potsdam, the question is about the post-war world, but and what's going to become of Germany, you know. But also the atomic bomb is an issue at Potsdam as well. Now, when it's all said and done, why do we drop an atomic bomb on the Japanese? I mean, what's at least the stated reason? What's the stated reason? Go ahead, Kelly.
Because an invasion would kill so many people.
So we thought this would shorten the war? Yes, it would shorten the war to do so and result in less loss of life. Now, there are questions about the post-war era, which are really kind of hard to talk about because, you know, we didn't talk about them in class, but I'm going to try to do the best I can, Samantha. Are you ready? One of the things that we are going to say in class, maybe eventually, is that the immediate post-war era is somewhat confusing in the United States, largely because demobilization is difficult. I mean, it was tough to mobilize the U.S. society and economy for war. That happened, which meant that factories were retooled, and people were drafted into the military, and, you know, women went to work. Oh, what was the symbol of women on the job? We really didn't talk about it. It was in the book, but you see it everywhere. It's, you know,
we can do it.
It's the big woman with the big guns, much like Richard's there, big strong arms, big guns. You know, what is the symbol? What's she called? Anybody know?
Judy.
Rosie the Riveter. Rosie the Riveter. Rosie the Riveter is the symbol of females that worked in factories during the war. And Rosie did have some big arms, and she worked in the factory. But when it was all over, what we wanted was this. America wanted the men to come home, go back and work in the factories, wanted the factories to produce consumer goods. They wanted the women to go back into the houses, right? And they wanted to sort of retreat from maybe some of their commitments overseas. They wanted to quickly demobilize and go back to normal. This causes problems. This causes problems. You know, it causes problems with inflation because wartime, you know, price controls are quickly lifted. It causes problems with unemployment because troops are brought home too quickly, right? It causes problems. Now, as a result of those problems, in 1946, for the first time since 1930, the Republicans take control of both houses of Congress. So by 1946, a backlash against kind of an immediate post-war confusion where it seemed that Truman was a little bit over his head because his critics were saying to err is Truman, right? You know, was that the Republicans took both houses of Congress in 46. Now, Truman this is going to be the 80th Congress, but eventually things are going to stabilize, right? I mean, the confusion, rising prices, unemployment, labor disputes, strikes, returning veterans coming on, that confusion is going to give way to a period of prosperity that lasts from 1946 until 1973, that we call the post-World War II economic boom. The economic boom ends with the kind of confusing, begins with the kind of confusing post-war unemployment / inflation, and ends with the Arab oil embargo in 1973. So in this time period, we say that the American economy prospered greatly. Now, there are a number of reasons for this, and you'll read about it in your book, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit. Low energy costs, was one of the reasons. Military expenditures, other things that fueled it. The boom. I forget what I was going to say. I was looking down here and I forgot where I wanted to go with this. This post World War II boom. Oh, another thing. Now it's coming. I did want to mention this. That contributes greatly to it is something called the GI Bill. I don't know if we'll get a chance to talk about this in class. The GI Bill was passed in 1944, prior to the end of the war. The GI Bill is considered by many to be one of the most far-reaching pieces of legislation in American history. What it did is provide for a number of benefits to be enjoyed by returning veterans from World War II, among which there were lots. I mean, we had it when the war ended, there were 12 million Americans under honor. And the GI Bill provided benefits to these people. And one of the most important benefits that the GI Bill provided was educational benefits. A whole generation of people attended college on the GI Bill. A whole generation of teachers and engineers and scientists were educated with dollars from the GI Bill. The GI Bill was considered to be foundational for the prosperity of the post-war era, because these veterans came home, left the workforce temporarily to be educated, and then after being educated, entered the workforce better trained and better equipped and more productive than they would have been had they not been educated. So the GI Bill also loaned money to people that wanted to start businesses and buy homes. And home construction during this time period contributes to sort of economic prosperity as well. Now, despite the fact that eventually the economy begins to prosper, Americans are still fearful, and we're going to talk a little bit about this tomorrow. Americans are still fearful of the future because of deteriorating relations between the United States and the Soviet Union. Almost as early as Potsdam, relations between the United States and Soviet Union are beginning to sour. They are souring at Yalta. They are souring at Potsdam. And to some extent, it becomes kind of apparent in the immediate aftermath of the war that the cordial relationships between the United States and Soviet Union was a wartime necessity. And now with Hitler defeated, the United States and the Soviet Union was going to resume their mutual suspicions. They had been suspicious of each other prior to the war. And to some extent, the U.S. and the Soviet Union had been outsiders. The Soviet Union had been the outsider to the east. The United States had been the outsider to the west. After the war, the insiders, Germany, France, Italy, England, had kind of been significantly weakened, if not decimated by war, and the outsiders had kind of been strengthened. But because of these sort of lingering mutual suspicions, the differences in ideology and system of government and economy, what starts as a period of time that we call the Cold War. Now, what makes a Cold War a Cold War? You hear this term, the Cold